Fox News alert, a big moment for President Trump on the world stage. Mr. Trump kicking off the final leg of his first trip abroad at the G7 summit in Italy, meeting the leaders of the world's major economies in what could be the most challenging G7 in some years, as divisions remain on key issues. This is Outnumbered. I'm Meghan McCain. Here today, Sandra Smith, Harris Faulkner, commentator and Fox News contributor Rachel Campos-Duffy, and today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, Brian Kilmeade. You need no introduction, but co-host of Fox and Friends and host of his nationally syndicated radio show, Kilmeade and Friends. Brian, you're outnumbered.
I'm privileged to be here. It's going to be great. And good thanks to the world for providing all these storylines. It's incredible what's happening right now.
Yeah, the world came through again.
Yes, I appreciate it, Earth. I owe you one. Yeah.
Well, let's get this Memorial weekend started. The White House expecting a tough debate on a range of hot-button issues as President Trump attends his very first G7 summit. Terrorism, trade, climate change, Russia and North Korea are just some of the issues topping the agenda. And speaking of North Korea, President Trump talking tough on the rogue regime during a meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Watch.
I think we will really be, in particular, focused on the North Korea problem. It's a big problem. It's a world problem. And it will be solved. At some point, it will be solved. You can bet on that.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts, who is traveling with the president, joins us live from the G7 summit in Sicily. Hi, John.
Megha, good afternoon to you from Taormina, where the scenery is beautiful and the weather is beautiful here as well. And just a short time ago, the G7 leaders got together to sign a joint communique on terrorism and violent extremism. And by doing that, they also showed solidarity with Britain and British Prime Minister Theresa May over the horrible events of earlier this week when 22 people were killed in that heinous Manchester bombing. As far as our president goes, there really are two takeaways from this summit that he is looking for. Try to level the playing field in a couple of particular areas, including trade and then military expenditures, which also reflects on the NATO leaders summit yesterday. First of all, in terms of trade, the president is trying to narrow the trade deficit that the United States has with a number of G7 countries. For example, our trade deficit with Canada stands at $11 billion. Our trade deficit with Japan at $69 billion. Our trade deficit with Germany at $65 billion. In a meeting with EU leaders yesterday, the president singled out Germany as saying it's bad, very bad. His chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn, sort of explaining what the president was talking about there, saying he doesn't believe that Germany is bad. He says his father was born there. Clearly doesn't think that the country or the people are bad. What he thinks is bad is German trade policy. Similarly, yesterday at the NATO Leaders Summit in Brussels, Belgium, the president calling out 23 of 28 NATO alliance members for not paying their fair share into the military alliance. The NATO threshold is 2% of GDP, but countries like Italy and Canada paying less than 1%, countries like France and Germany paying less than 2%, whereas the United States is picking up the lion's share of the military costs at 3.61% of our GDP. Another big topic of conversation here in the next day and a half will be climate change. And of course, the president is mulling over a decision on whether or not to take the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement. His chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn, earlier today speaking to that, suggesting that the president's thinking on it may be evolving. Cohen saying, quote, I think he's leaning to understanding the European position. He knows that in the U.S. there's very strong opinions on both sides, but he also knows that Paris has important meaning to many of the European leaders. Cohen saying that the president definitely wants to hear what the European leaders have to say on this. He delayed making a decision on whether or not to withdraw from Paris until after the G7. So it's likely he's gathering some information, some intelligence here, Meghan, and then we'll make that decision soon after he returns to the United States. And he's heading back there again tomorrow. Meghan?
Thank you so much for that report, John. Okay, start with you, Brian. My actually biggest curiosity on this is whether or not President Trump is going to stay with the Paris Climate Agreement.
Well, I think his EPA director doesn't want him to. Steve Bannon does not want him to. His son-in-law does want him to. His daughter does want him to stick with it. The Pope, I'm sure that was what most of the quality time they spent together was about, so he wants him to. In the end, the people that put him in office don't want him to adhere to it. So I think he's going to end up sticking with that. I wonder if there's a third way. If there's a way in which you could amend it, which isn't so economically taxing potentially on us right now. If there could be a third way, I think he'd take it. If right now if I was a betting person, I say he says goodbye.
You know, Harris, the G7 summit used to be the G8 summit because Russia was involved in this. Now no longer. It'll be interesting if, you know, anything regarding Russia and Putin comes up.
Well, I can't imagine that it wouldn't come up, right? Like, we know that in that working meeting at NATO yesterday that we were anticipating hearing something about it. Of course, it was a private meeting, so we weren't anticipating a transcript necessarily of that. But I don't know that there are discussions at that global level that are happening without talking about Russia, if only for the fact that, separate from our own president and the issues here in the United States and the investigations, so on and so forth, but also just the role that Russia plays right now, both in Syria and with its friend Iran. I mean, there are just a lot of things that point to Russia, so I can't imagine a situation where it wouldn't come up. I would say this, though, about America paying its fair share. Who's going to pick up the gap if we pull out? You know,
we are it. I mean, the question is China going to do what they're supposed to do? Most of the things that China's got to do with the Paris Agreement happened in like 20 years.
Yeah, and their economy,
all these leaders are going to be out.
From what I'm reading, their economy is suffering right now because their currency is so devalued. So they've got their own woes and troubles right now.
Well, the economy is definitely going to be at the core of this summit, as it always is and has been. I think a lot of these leaders are going to have big questions about how his policies and his intentions as the new president of this country are going to either adversely affect them or benefit them. There's a lot of uncertainty there. Obviously, Brexit is going to play a big role in that decision-making progress. Also, the trade agreements that he is talking about. Doing away with some of them. I think there's a lot of uncertainty to that. There's going to be a lot of worry there.
I think there's a lot of contrast here. I mean, here are the Europeans. They think their biggest problem in the midst of all of this is including climate change. And by the way, he could probably say yes to Paris just to pacify Ivanka and Jared, but look what he's doing in the Environmental Protection Agency. He's undone all of these regulations here anyway. So he may be able to split the baby that way, make people happy, do a formality there. And back to your point, if he met with the Pope, and the Pope's main concern was climate change, what a travesty. I say that as a Catholic. We are sitting here in the midst of, I mean, this is like first century persecution of Christians.
Yeah, they
and
just
if that's what he did with the
Coptic Christians, yes.
I'm actually extremely disappointed. Right. Not the first time with this Pope, but really sad.
Yeah, Pope's not a big America fan. I get the sense.
Yeah, but
even
he should
after
be a big
visit,
Christian fan, right?
Yes, I would think so. I don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but they were glum in the beginning and they're smiling at the end. I'm fascinated by the body language stuff that's been going on.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a second. What's he doing with the leader of Montenegro? Pushed her to the side. Hey, what's going on there?
Yeah,
the handshake. Why was whispering in the middle of his speech? So how long did they hold each other's hands when they greeted each other?
Wait,
I never remember this before.
Are you saying that that's warranted? All the talk about the body language and the handshakes?
Well, there's so much focus on President Trump, how he's going to be received because he's going to be, they say he's going to be vilified and he's not the world's president like President Obama. So everyone's just watching what's going on with such scrutiny. I'm fascinated by it.
Part of it, too, is the legitimacy issue that Democrats have pressed so much at home, such that when he leaves U.S. soil, they are still questioning his policies and still pushing against this president. And I'm not saying, and I said this yesterday, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen when a president is gone abroad, but this is his first trip as president and his dialogue at home. You know, so he gets there and they are hearing this rhetoric in the press and they're treating him based on what the liberals on American soil have been saying about it.
Right, and President Obama, of course, being invited to speak with Angela Merkel in a little town hall in Germany, sitting there a day before she meet with the president to kind of say, that's the guy we liked, as opposed to the guy that you got now.
Well, she's in trouble right now, though, too. I mean, it just, you know, statistically with her own election coming up in Germany, and she is the last global leader of this wave of progressivism that has been replaced with this wave of populism. We talked about it yesterday. I think it's deeply ridiculous ridiculous that President Obama is over there making a speech and speaking out against this administration while President Trump is making his first. Well, it's just highly inappropriate. And if you turn the tables, had Bush done this to Obama, liberals would be screaming bloody murder in the street.
Well,
and
it would be on the front page of everything.
But let me ask you,
the liberal media, it would be everywhere. It would be like the most talked about thing.
Brian, does he bring the success, the momentum that he's picked up on this trip? I mean, even Democrats have been saying this is a successful trip. Does that come home?
If he sets up what he's supposed to set up, and that is, I love the idea of a mini war room. I love the idea of a independent counsel, a lawyer working for him. And I love him saying, and commit to saying this, every time you bring up Russia outside arming the Ukrainians, you say, yeah, that's in Mueller's hands.
Well, in the mini war
and just push that aside. Make him talk. Make the conversation about substance. I think he'll be fine.
So your husband is a sitting member in Congress. And so the mini war room speaks to me because that's like campaign style, right? And we know that it's necessary. Otherwise, your candidate gets off message, and so does his team. So he's taking maybe some of that into the White House now.
I think he needs to be on campaign mode because he's under constant attack. The way you see somebody, he's not getting a grace period like other presidents. And by the way, speaking of the body language, what I think is this has been a highly successful trip. So they have to remember they said he's not, focused on international issues. He's not engaged. He's been so engaged on everything and impressing everybody. So they have to find some little thing. Oh, he snubbed this guy, pushed ahead or whatever.
I kind of like the assessment.
He's showing he's in charge. It's leadership. America's back.
All right. Well, we're certainly not going to end the conversation there. As we mentioned, terror will be a big topic at the G7 today. This as Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly is warning that we should expect more Manchester-style attacks. In light of that, are we less safe after President Trump's travel ban got blocked again in the courts? Plus, Republican Greg Gianforte pulling out a win in Montana's special election after embracing President Trump's agenda. How bad was this loss for the Democrats? And does it prove their resistance strategy is failing? We're going to debate next.
Montana sent a strong message tonight that we want a congressman who will work with President Trump to make America and Montana great again.
Republican Greg Gianforte winning a special election in Montana last night, taking the state's only congressional seat. The win coming just a day after he was charged with misdemeanor assault for allegedly grabbing a reporter and throwing him to the ground. Democrats may have thought President Trump's low approval ratings and White House controversies would bring Gianforte down, but instead he attached himself to the president's agenda and turned it into a winning strategy. Watch.
Tonight, Montanans are sending a wake-up call to Washington, D.C. establishment. Montanans said, we're going to drain the swamp. Montana sent a strong message tonight that we want a congressman who will work with President Trump to make America and Montana great again.
Now all eyes turn to Georgia and the special election on June 20th, pitting Democrat Jon Ossoff against Republican Karen Handel. Kilmeade, what is the message that we should take away from this Montana special election?
All right, Smith, let's get down to it. When I take away from it,
what do you think?
Yeah, I feel like I'm back in gym class. I think we have kickball this semester. But let me just
huddle up, you guys. Come on.
If we can do that, please.
Campus Duffy.
But I will say this. I'm amazed at when I heard that they had a fight and that we caught it on tape. I'm saying, what else bizarre could be happening in this country?
Tape as in audio, by the way.
In audio, yeah. We have the audio tape. And then to think they're going to vote the next day, he kept his mouth shut until he won, and then he apologized. I'm fascinated to see that we have controversy even on a special election that should be a runaway for the Republicans. What I walk away with, too, is if Gianforte is going to wear that after he wins, how does he dress down on the weekends? I mean, I heard of earth tones.
It's Montana.
I've never been to Montana, and I love it. It looks great. It's just that usually when you have this moment, the signature moment in your life, you wear a tie.
So there are two issues, and you mentioned one, and that is the separate issue of the politics. And if Democrats aren't a little worried, they ought to be, because this wasn't just a squeaker. This was a big gap.
Considering everything that happened, absolutely.
But let's separate that from us becoming a bully nation and accepting misdemeanor assault charges as the norm, and letting an apology be enough to make that go away. So he's got to go to court. He's got to do all of the legal things now to deal with that situation. And as a journalist, to think that somebody put their hands on me, allegedly, although we have the audio and the broken glasses, the thought of that is really scary. Because we ask tough questions. That's what we do for a living. I think they live in two separate zones. He's got to go deal with that other zone.
All right, so what does this all mean for Georgia?
Well, here's what I think. I think the big message is that I think Montana didn't go and vote for Gianforte last night after what he did. I think what they voted for was the Republican agenda. And I think the message to the Republicans is that they want, the American people voted for Donald Trump and this agenda, and they cannot get weak-kneed because the press is mean, and the press is painting things in ways that are unfair. They need to push through, get this agenda through, because in the end, the American people are going to vote in 2 years, and then or a year and a half, and then in 2 years after that on results.
So does he get a pass for putting his hands on that reporter?
What I'm saying is, regardless of what happened there, I mean, maybe some people voted for him because they think he's scrappy and a fighter. I think a lot of people just said, I don't care what he did, just get this country back on track, pass health care, pass tax reform, and get us jobs. They're moving past the things. I mean, if not, look at Donald Trump got elected at the most candidate that's most untraditional, has done things that people said you can't do to get elected.
I have several things to say. First off, regarding the violence, it shows that hostility towards the media isn't necessarily something that's going to be a deal breaker for voters, for better or worse. Last time you were on the couch, we talked about violence directed towards politicians, and you got quite, intense about it.
Right.
I agree. I don't like violence in any way unless we're killing terrorists, period. I don't like it.
Amen
I don't like
to that.
the idea that it's socially acceptable. You're a journalist. You're my favorite person ever, and I don't like the idea of anyone putting their hands on anyone. But I'm just saying the idea of anyone where it's okay, where violence is sort of becoming socially accepted because it's hostility towards the media. You flip the coin. There's a lot of violence and uptick happening to politicians and their families as well across the country. So it's not, these two things aren't mutually exclusive. There's an uptick in hostility and violence happening in this country. I don't like it. I don't think any constitutionalist should like it.
But I don't think they're voting for. I don't think the vote.
I'm just talking about violence, and I believe you called it a Kentucky or a Montana throwdown yesterday on the specialist. So, I just think we have to be ideologically consistent in our analysis that I don't like violence towards politicians. I don't like violence towards journalists.
I don't either. I don't like it either. But I'm saying the people voted for him not because or not because of that. I think they're voting for an agenda to get forward.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the numbers of this election, because President Trump won by 20 points in Montana in the general election. This man only won by 6. He lost by 4 running for governor in the general election. Yes, this is a win. Is it a significant enough of a win going into midterm elections? As a general rule, I don't like reading the tea leaves of special elections, because you look at people like what happened in Boston with Scott Brown. He ultimately only ended up living 2 terms. Republicans need to be careful. This 6 points is significant. It's not significant enough to show a wave change.
Georgia will be much more indicative
of
where we're heading.
Yeah, and Democrats at the very least need to be paying attention. But I would argue it's more than just paying attention. They can't bet that Republicans are going to just sit down, whether there's this legal issue with Gianforte or not.
All right, we'll keep watching.
I wouldn't hitch my wagon to him. I would look much more to Georgia.
Yeah.
British police launching new raids this morning in the Manchester terror attack as the UK remains on high alert, with investigators hunting for a possible second bomb. We'll have a live report and a frightening warning from one of our top security officials here in the U.S. Why he says we could see more attacks like this one in the future.
Fox News alert, British police are making a new arrest this morning in the Manchester bombing. Investigators say 8 men are now in custody after 2 people were released without charges. This as authorities now say they believe the attacker, Salman al-Bedi, built the bomb himself after learning how to do it in Libya. But investigators say the amount of material discovered inside his home is raising fears about whether a second bomb could be in the hands of another terrorist. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Calcott is live for us in Manchester. Greg?
Hello, Harris. That's right. We are outside the memorial for the victims of the attack on Monday. This is one of the most emotional days that we have seen here at this scene. But in the past hour or so, some real important words coming from one of the top law enforcement officials in this country that, and I'm quoting here, immense progress has been made in the hunt for those supporting the bomber. We have seen raids today. We saw arrests overnight. But according to this official, they have got a hold of a large part of that support network. They have made significant arrests and fines, they say, and they have in custody some key players. That is reassuring. But it's not reassuring. There was new information coming out today about the bomber, Salam Abedi. He reportedly first used his home about 3 miles away from the concert venue that he attacked Monday night to put together his backpack bomb. And then, to put the finishing touches on it, he rented an apartment just a couple blocks away and then went in for the kill. And yes, because of the extra material found, the empty chemical containers found, officials think that perhaps there could be another bomb out there, and that's why they are keeping security high, even ratcheting up further. We're seeing armed officers on trains here in this country. That is something new for this country, and an official once more reaffirming that they are staying at the highest level, the critical level of terror threat in this country. A lot of armed folks walking around today here, Harris. Finally, we have a word of the death toll. That is publicly identified, all 22 victims. And yeah, what we feared is true. The young were hit so very hard by this terror attack. 10 of the 22 were children or teenagers. And remember, there are still 63 hospitalized around this city. 14 of those are kids, 23 overall in critical condition. One last note, Harris, this is a upcoming holiday long weekend for Britain as well as the United States. A lot of sporting events and cultural events planned in the city. They are all going forward. Everybody I talked to said that is the best way to show defiance in the face of cowardly terror. Back to you.
You know, we talk about, just real quickly before we let you go, Greg, the beginning of the official memorializing of these people whom we've lost, but I cannot lose track of what is happening behind you. That is a huge growing memorial, and we pray for them here in the United States as they make the tough move to go on this weekend.
It is huge. I'll step away and ask my cameraman Pierre to scoot behind the camera and just give you a quick view of this. It is growing day by day, and even on this day, we're 4 days after the attack, we have seen emotion, we have seen tears, we have seen prayers. I watched a young girl, no doubt, who had friends in the concert, just stand for 20 minutes and look out at this field of flowers. The folks here, too, are solid, they're strong, and they're also grateful for the support coming from the United States. They remember our attack, the 9/11 attack. There were Brits involved in that, and they have expressed their gratitude to the expressions, for example, from the Secretary of State Tillerson today in London, of condolences to the folks here. And that's it for this moment in Manchester. Back to you right now, Harris.
Greg Palcott, thank you very much. Now to stopping things from happening that leave us as targets. Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly is warning the American people to expect more terror attacks like the Manchester bombing. Kelly told Congress the Islamic State terror group is sending terrorists from Iraq and Syria back to their home countries to fight.
Every community, small village, town in America is vulnerable. Terrorists that are fighting in the caliphate, Syria and Iraq, they're going home. But not going home to live normal lives. In fact, they were being encouraged to not be killed in the caliphate fight. Go back to where you came from and just create Manchester type fights. As horrible as Manchester was, my expectation is we're going to see a lot more of that kind of attack.
All right, so you got the warning, right? Interesting timing. A Virginia-based federal appeals court just refused to reinstate President Trump's revised travel ban, affecting 6 Muslim-majority countries prone to terrorism. Now, Attorney General Jeff Sessions says he will take that case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Brian?
Well, I think that's great, number one, that Jeff Sessions is handling it. That just shows a dissemination of responsibility, because it used to be the president responding to every single issue, every single proposal. I also think it's great that Homeland Security Secretary General Kelly, who looks like an apolitical person, doesn't look like a Republican or a Democrat. It marginalizes people who want to just use an opportunity to gang up on this president. But I think what is really telling is we have not moved fast enough in Raqqa and Mosul. Now, I know we're not supposed to take the lead with the previous administration. But today, we finally agreed to arm the right Kurds. We finally agree we can't pay attention to Turkey and worry about them. We have to wipe them out quickly, contain them, and then start moving into our cities. Right now, they're still training, they're still exporting, and they're still in existence. They can honestly say there's still a caliphate there today, and that has to be the focus over the next 6 years.
So, Brian, I know on Fox and Friends, I watch you have generals on and military leadership all the time, and I wrote down what you said, the delegation of authority and leadership via, Jeff Sessions, not always the president, but the Raqqa and Mosul segment of this picture is really important, and you hear from that leadership all the time in the military.
Yeah, as much as our guys are ready to go and they are able to, the commanders in the field, and you know this better than anyone, Megan, have been able to use their own volition and their own instincts. I think we had trouble with the politics of it so far, and even amongst our generals in the field, they're arguing with each other, so the president could finally get something to sign off on, and that is to wipe out Raqqa and take back Mosul, and also they have to get together on a plan for the next day so they don't come back in 3 or 4 months, and then we could say, well, watching wherever you go. And England's got to say, I can't accept 400 of my former citizens back in our country and allowed to live in a flat, and we'll keep an eye on you, but they actually don't. Then they end up killing children.
All right, before we move on, there's at least one judge who's on the record today as being the dissenting voice in all this. He says the real losers in this case are the millions of individual Americans whose security is threatened on a daily basis by those who seek to do us harm. The president and his national security advisors, and perhaps future presidents, will be seriously hampered in their ability to exercise their constitutional duty to protect this country. So he's talking about what has happened by upholding the stay on this.
Absolutely. It's so disingenuous to call this a ban. It's a pause. And by the way, these countries, the ones on the list, are countries that we don't even have an embassy there. These are countries that are not targeted because they're Muslim. They're targeted because they have weak institutions, and we can't vet them. And the American people voted on November, 8th? November 8th, they said, we don't trust the way these people have been vetted under the Obama administration. We want something else. And I just think
the judge doesn't believe that. The judge thinks it's a ban on Muslims. He said that.
The judges think Donald Trump is a bigger threat to democracy than these terrorists. That's what I think.
Sandra?
Look, I talked to Ambassador Bolton, John Bolton yesterday, General Jack Keane, all weighed in on the risk that we face here at home of another possible attack. Do you get the sense, Brian, that this president understands the reality of that threat, both obviously abroad and here at home?
Better than anybody else, but he has used the wrong word. He keeps saying ban. I agree.
He does.
With you.
I agree.
So he makes things worse for him.
So what does he need to say?
What I think he needs to say is, Jeff Sessions, you handle it. Outline again what we're doing it, and then you say we're going to the Supreme Court with that. Right, Mr. Attorney General? Because he's got other things to do. Start pushing other faces out there. Let them be the sound bites for a change. Start running this place.
Wow. Memorial Day weekend is upon us, and Memorial Day is a time to also take a pause and thank and appreciate all the men and women who have sacrificed so much. I think of the last 8 years under President Obama, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when there was definitely a morale gap in our military, because from my perspective and the perspective of many others, we had a president who wouldn't let them win. So going forward, no matter what happens, this threat is real. Secretary Kelly saying this is an attack that will probably happen again in the same kind of context should put chills down everyone's throat. We should let President Trump lead, and he has amazing people surrounding him. General Mattis, Kelly, McMaster, incredible people surrounding him who I have the ultimate faith in. Let President Trump lead. We didn't let President Obama was incapable of doing that.
All right, we'll move on. Look who's back. Yeah, she was at the microphone. Hillary Clinton is imparting her wisdom to graduates at her alma mater. What is she talking about? Her post-election life? What's she saying in her veiled shots at President Trump?
The resistance.
Hillary Clinton delivering the commencement address at her alma mater, Wellesley College, today. The speech comes as the former Democratic presidential nominee taking steps to re-enter the public arena after her crushing loss to President Trump last November. Hillary taking time to reflect in a lighthearted way on her post-election life.
You may have heard that things didn't exactly go the way I planned. But you know what? I'm doing okay. I've gotten to spend time with my family, especially my amazing grandchildren. I was going to give the entire commencement speech about them, but was talked out of it. Long walks in the woods. Organizing my closets, right? I won't lie, Chardonnay helped a little too.
In addition to that, Hillary appeared to take a shot at President Trump when she told graduates this.
You are graduating at a time when there is a full-fledged assault on truth and reason. People denying science, concocting elaborate, hurtful conspiracy theories about child abuse rings operating out of pizza parlors, drumming up rampant fear about undocumented immigrants, Muslims, minorities, the poor, turning neighbor against neighbor and sowing division at a time when we desperately need unity. Some are even denying things we see with our own eyes, like the size of crowds. And then defending themselves by talking about, quote unquote, alternative facts. But this is serious business.
Kind of funny. The Chardonnay line was kind of funny.
Right. It was good. It shows you humility, which was lacking on the campaign trail. I'm fascinated with the book Shattered, which gives a total detailed chronicle of what happened.
So good. Yeah.
And one of the things that comes out is there's just a desperation of her saying over and over again in many different ways, what's going on with this country? They're not listening to me or my husband. What happened? She ends it by saying, I sat in your seat 40 years ago. Look at the journey I went through. Yes, she's a success story. She became a senator, first lady, everything she's done. If she took it from there and told her biography, she would have been much more successful. Admit, now she's desperate to matter at 70 when she should be pulling back and reflecting back and being more of a statesman.
Jeez, it was such a lighthearted moment. Thanks for going so deep, Brian.
I really surprised you, didn't you?
Well, I mean, I always have to put this in. She's a big success in no part because she married the right man, which I always find the irony in her being such a strong feminist when a lot of her narrative has to do with her husband and her involvement with her husband. No shade, she comes from a different generation, but you should keep that in part when talking about this. Shattered's a great book, totally fascinating. Her staff continue to do her a complete disservice. People love Hillary when she's not in office, when she's like drinking in South America, drinking beer and dancing with her staff. Remember those pictures that came out?
Funny. That was something that was
when
funny.
She's like not emboldened by having to run for office and be sitting in office. She can be. I would not go as far as likable, but not quite as heinous as she was.
I like her in the magazine. I don't want to date her.
Yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head, though, Megan. People like her when she's out of country. She likes herself more when she's in those positions because she's not called upon to carry on her shoulders an entire party that was trying to figure out what was going on with her. I mean, I think that the self-awareness issue that Brian was alluding to is huge for Hillary Clinton. She sold parts of her narrative that were never going to fly, but she didn't have the self-awareness enough to know, or the self-honesty perhaps, and I don't know her personally, so that seems more like a personal word. I'll go back to awareness of what not to say, and what not to try to sell.
She didn't
Sandra,
have
how
the
come you don't say Harris is too deep? Why is there a double
That was
standard?
deep.
That was deep. That was even deeper than me,
Because,
but
Brian,
no comment
when you
from you.
get up for the digital version of us and you can't be here, we put a stuffed bear in
that's just true.
So in all fairness, you brought it forward.
But
right
I mean,
there.
I was just to say, she didn't have the self-awareness. She said that people are science deniers, denying things we see with our own eyes. I challenge Hillary Clinton to look at an ultrasound. But in addition, I would say this. It reminds me a lot of Mitt Romney. If you saw the Mitt Romney documentary, he was so darn likable.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing. There's probably some likable things about Hillary, but let's face it, she is the epitome, in my opinion, of white privilege, of what she exactly tries to fight against or purports to be standing up against. She and Chelsea are the epitome of that.
Do we want to press in and figure out how the ultrasound came in? I got lost.
Oh, she called conservatives and the Trump administration science deniers, and they're talking about climate change. I think when it comes to fetal development, the left is definitely science deniers.
Yes,
oh, interesting.
100%.
Gosh, we went from long walks in the woods.
Sorry, I get deeper.
No, I want to make sure we got that right, because I know
ask me to clarify that because maybe I didn't.
Because it sounded like an interesting point that
You know, in
went right
stand-up
over my
they say
head.
you leave on a high.
Yeah.
If we were doing stand-up, we should all leave right now.
Yeah,
This is the best talk ever. I don't know how we topped it.
And many people want to know, is it true that we put a stuffed bear in your chair when you're not here?
That is absolutely true.
Yes.
Yeah.
That
made a
happened
lot of
once.
sense.
That happened once.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see where she goes from here because she's certainly not going away. She's certainly not going to stay quiet. Neither her nor President Obama are going to give Trump the luxury that President Bush did for President Obama. It'll be interesting to see where they go from here because this hashtag resistance movement, which I still have yet to see how it's effective in any way, passing legislation or getting anyone elected.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Al Gore was also classy, right?
Al Gore was also classy.
Go to
Mitt
the
Romney
new
was
nerve
also
center that
classy.
the Obamas have set up in their home in D.C.,
Maybe
right?
she'll organize their closets.
Okay.
Oh, goodness.
I've got
I'm
to
not
go.
sure they're allowed in each other's houses. I'm not sure there's a lot of friendliness.
I'm glad
there.
we were able to get that in there. Forget universal health care. Billionaire Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg wants universal income to take care of people's basic needs. But should we get paid just for being alive? That debate coming up. Beware. Now Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg calling to step up government handouts. Zuckerberg telling Harvard grads that it's time to consider the idea of universal basic income. Under such a plan, the government would pay everyone a small amount of money to cover basic needs. Watch.
Every generation expands its definition of equality. Now it's time for our generation to define a new social contract. We should have a society that measures progress not just by economic metrics like GDP, but by how many of us have a role we find meaningful. We should explore ideas like universal basic income to make sure that everyone has a cushion to try new ideas.
So to be fair, Brian, he didn't call for it. He said we should explore it.
I got to jump in real quick. That man will never be president. He's floating around running for president. He has the charm of the pen.
Right.
I mean, it's like watching paint dry.
Right. A couple of things. That's the happiest, the most animated I've ever seen him.
Really?
Yeah. I think that sure is true from what I've seen. But we can't afford this cushion, let alone we're already over budget $550 billion, and that's a good year. We owe $20 trillion, and now his idea is to spend more because he has more.
Well, I don't mind if he wants to spend his $63 billion.
Right.
Like, I'm actually really comfortable with that idea. I would challenge him because Sandra and I were just talking. I thought it was urban legend, but he's given away some money before.
He has
Absolutely.
before. I think it was before the birth of he and his wife's daughter back in 2015. Donated 99% of his Facebook stake to charity, and of course, Facebook keeps hitting all-time highs. I mean, this is his current net worth.
Let him give it away.
Right. There's a couple of things. I don't know how you feel, but you need to give people an incentive to be successful. If you give them the mansion, if you give them the great job, and they know they didn't earn it, those are going to be the drug users and
you
abusers
think
who are blow.
And you know, with 8 children, you know this is true.
Exactly. And I think I look at this as a mom, and first of all, I'm one of those moms that doesn't give an allowance. I don't think you should get money just for breathing.
They should take it from you when you're not looking.
No,
Right?
they should do chores, which is what they do to get their money. And some of the unhappiest people I've ever met have been trust fund babies. Pope Francis said, you earn your dignity when you earn your bread. He didn't say you get your dignity by eating the bread. It's the earning part of it. And I think a lot of times this cushion that Zuckerberg is talking about, it's when people don't have a cushion, is when they work hard and they have this drive. And I've seen that over and over again in my own life.
And we're not saying there's any absolutes. We're not saying that there aren't people that could benefit a little bit. And where there's people, and especially if you have any type of handicap or affliction, you're going to need help. But what he's doing is he's diminishing himself. He outworked people. How many hours did the Gates put in? How many hours did he put in? He drops out of school, takes a tremendous risk. I'm sure he came from some money, but he probably worked 20 hours a day for years in order to move this forward. And fundamentally, you got to be inspired to work, but it is work.
You also wonder what this does to our economy. If anything like this were to ever play out, how would you fill menial roles and, minimum wage roles in this country?
I mean, I agree with what Brian's saying, that there's always going to be a segment of the population that needs help, that needs a step up. That's not what we're speaking about right now. This sort of like normalizing of socialism in America that really amped up in the past 2.5 years with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren should scare everyone. And President Obama. And I will say that it is ironic coming from Mark Zuckerberg, especially because he is a self-made man and he's one of the true geniuses. He's the Henry Ford of our times, and he created something that has completely changed the way the world works, the way politics works, everything. And for him to say, actually, don't do it the way I did it. Don't work hard and become a billionaire. Just let me give everything to you. It seems counterproductive to his own story.
It's troubling to me that we also live at a time when any young person is challenged on many college campuses across America. They need a safe space. And I think that if you complement that journey along with handing them so much, not only will they not be incentivized to work hard, they'll feel the need for more protectionism than we can drum up. Like, we won't be able to protect or pay them enough. That is, and as a parent, I see it. It's the every trophy thing beyond a certain age.
Absolutely.
16-year-olds should not be getting a trophy if they haven't done anything.
Absolutely.
Well, my argument is it starts much younger.
Right.
But that makes me, maybe
you
the world's only
overcompensated
living
for the
hard
generation that cut 8-year-olds on the spot with a list on the locker room. Now we keep everybody on the team.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's autobiographical. In fact, we have some footage. Can we roll it?
Little Brian not making the soccer team.
Yeah, this has gotten a little too bit autobiographical. For a second. I know, Miss Speedster, you never had that happen to you, Sandra.
Miss Steeplechase.
Miss Track Star.
Yeah. I won a medal running a 5K the other day. Wait, are you saying they gave medals to everybody?
No, you earned it. You won your bracket.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
30 and under.
All right, Mark Zuckerberg making news there. More Outnumbered in just a moment.